I will be doing something different. First of all, I have a statement that's in writing, so it will make life easier for all of you. The other is I want to use this opportunity to address an appeal directly to the people of Sri Lanka, irrespective of the community that they belong to. I want to begin with the appeal and I want to end with that appeal. I want to appeal to them, whatever community they belong to, not to be swayed by the events imposed upon them from the outside, but to keep their focus on the issues that concern them directly, that is the real issues, the issues that affect their lives, their daily lives, their working and their living conditions, the issues that determine the way they voted and the political choice they made at the recent local government elections. The vote of the people in those elections, whichever way they voted, was not a vote for or against Muslims. It was not a vote for or against Tamils. It was not a vote for or against Sinhalese. It was a vote against or in favor, but mostly against, the Yahapala government and its pro-Western policies, which were anti-people policies, which the people correctly identified as being responsible for the rapid decline in their working and living conditions, and also for their loss of sovereignty. Now, we find ourselves once again in a very decisive moment in the history of our country. And that's also why I am glad that I have this opportunity to make this appeal. I say once again because the situation today in many ways resembles that of July 1983. When politically motivated goon attacks were organized to provoke ethnic divisions amongst fellow Sri Lankans in order to divert their attention away from the real issues and to prevent them from uniting against the established status quo. The choices that were made by the leadership in July 83 took the people down the path into one of the darkest ages of Sri Lanka's recent history, which saw more than 2.5 decades of conflict and war, the rise of extremism, terrorism and separatism, a permanent state of emergency and fear, the curtailment of fundamental freedoms, democratic and human rights, the institutionalization of impunity, a deterioration in the living and working conditions of the masses, the physical elimination of progressive forces and future leaders, the dismantling of public services and enterprises, the destruction of the country's social fabric and loss of values, and very importantly, external intervention in the affairs of our country, including in the form of support to terrorism and in the form of direct military intervention. The situation today is eerily comparable to July 1983, the only difference being the community targeted yesterday were Tamils, today Muslims. Then as now, the UNP was in power. Then as now, the tragic events took place in the context of tremendous economic and political crisis and social upheaval. Then as now, the people were blamed for the violence. If necessary, I will respond to any questions you may have later on. But I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. So then as now, the government had lost its legitimacy. Then as now, the unilateral choices made by the political leadership will affect the future of the country, its independence and its sovereignty, and also the right of our peoples to determine their economic, social, cultural, and political destiny. The recent events must be placed in their proper context to be understood. In the 3 years of the Yahapalana regime, the socio-economic conditions of the masses have rapidly deteriorated. It is the ordinary people who have had to bear the brunt of an increasingly heavy debt burden of an externally driven development model and the resulting pro-bank, anti-people conditionalities imposed by the IMF and the World Bank. Austerity, privatization, and liberalization of trade and finance in favor of foreign capital have seriously undermined the real economy upon which the majority of our people depend for their livelihood, badly affecting food security, increasing the cost of living, and negatively affecting real wages. You see the parallels between 83 and now. What I found shocking was a report of a UN Food and Agriculture Organization, a recent one, which says that 25% of the Sri Lankan population does not have sufficient food to sustain a healthy life. In South Asia, according to the report, the prevalence of undernourishment in Sri Lanka is only second to the situation in Afghanistan. On the political front, I'm still referring to the context in which the attacks took place. The results of the long-delayed local government elections turned out to be a political debacle that we all know already for the Yahapalana Combine. Irrespective of their vote at the 2015 presidential elections, the people massively rejected the Yahapalana policies. I know people, I know a number of them around me who voted in 2015 for the present regime. And I know that during these elections, they voted for Pohotua. So today the government is faced with an unprecedented crisis of cohesion within the UNP, between the UNP and the SLP faction in government, between the president and the prime minister, with the leadership of the prime minister challenged from within and without his own party, a looming no confidence motion, a general election and presidential elections around the corner. Like J.R. Jayawardena before him, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe is faced with the predicament of having to fulfill the commitments made to Washington in the face of this combined opposition. Like Jayawardena, Ranil Wickremesinghe will need a parliamentary majority to accelerate pro-Western reforms that he has begun, including the drafting of a new constitution demanded by Washington. This is the context in which the recent anti-Muslim attacks took place. The question that arises, I know, is in everybody's mind, is who benefits from the crime? Do the Sri Lankan people, I mean all the people, irrespective of their origins, benefit from the attacks against the Muslims? I will respond to this question with another. Is it possible that people would benefit from having their attention diverted away from the real issues that mobilized them at the local government elections and forced many to reverse the stand they took at the 2015 presidential elections? Is it possible that people who have been victims of more than 2 decades of war would want to go through another? Is it possible that the people benefit from a state of emergency that permits the regime to curtail their freedom of expression and opinion, freedom of the press, their right to information, their freedom to communicate, their freedom to hold meetings, their freedom to take collective action, including through strikes, meetings, demonstrations, rallies, etc.? Is it possible that the people would enjoy living in fear, fear of arbitrary arrest, fear of incommunicado detention, fear of torture, fear of summary execution, etc.? In this connection, I just want to, it's an anecdote, but a few days ago I was talking to a three-wheel driver, and we were discussing the situation, and he said, look, I would prefer to go and talk to you inside, because if I'm seen discussing, if somebody hears us discussing this, you know, we can go to jail for 20 years or for life. You know, this is what he said, which means this is our stories that are being spoken around him. That's why I'm raising this question. A continuation of the state of emergency may result in provincial council elections being postponed once again, and perhaps the general elections replaced with a referendum under state of emergency, as Jayawardena did in 1982. Now, if the attacks don't benefit the people, then whom does it benefit? Does it benefit the political opposition? There's already an international campaign against Mahinda Rajapaksa claiming he is behind the anti-Muslim attacks. How credible are these accusations? Having just won an impressive political victory, how would he benefit from a state of emergency that will prevent him from mobilizing the masses for the bigger political battles ahead? The provincial council elections, the general elections, and the presidential elections. In fact, the effect of the anti-Muslim attacks has already been to place the opposition on the defensive. There's been a deafening silence until I saw this morning on the proposed no-confidence motion against the Prime Minister, on the bond scam, on the controversial project to draft a new constitution, on the catastrophic situation in which the country finds itself, etc., etc. Do the attacks benefit Washington? Objectively speaking, coming at a point that its governmental ally was in serious difficulty, the attacks targeting a particular ethnic or religious group help justify Washington's demand that universal jurisdiction or external intervention be applied to Sri Lanka through the implementation of its March 2015 Human Rights Council resolution, which demands a complete overhaul of the system of governments. Washington has been concerned that its resolution has been widely contested by the Sri Lankan people, including at the highest level of state. The return of the controversial US Peace Corps, a soft power weapon in Washington's arsenal, which had been expelled by the government of Sirimao Bandaranaike for spying for the CIA, reflects Washington's fears about the forthcoming general elections and presidential elections. The US Peace Corps has been expelled from a number of countries for spying for the CIA and for other covert activities, for meddling in local politics, and even for running drugs. As recently as September 2017, and I'm referring to this because of its importance for the forthcoming general elections and the sudden reappearance of the Peace Corps, the US Peace Corps. In September 2017, the Cambodian Prime Minister demanded the withdrawal of the US Peace Corps for conspiring with the opposition leader Kem Sokha to overthrow his government. So this is what the Peace Corps has been doing around the world and continues to do. The results of the local government election have made it all the more urgent now for Washington to strengthen its allies within the government. The US ambassador's Viceroy-like behavior, even before all the results of the local government elections were released to the public, when he rushed, as he did, to request the president not to replace the prime minister, demonstrated the extent to which Washington would be ready to go to maintain the status quo. The anti-Muslim attacks provided just such an opportunity. The timing of the attacks to coincide with the sessions of the Human Rights Council, the arrival of the US Peace Corps, and the arrival of the UN Under-Secretary General for Political Affairs, Jeffrey Feltman, who is a former US Assistant Secretary of State, is not fortuitous. It gave the High Commissioner the opportunity to threaten Sri Lanka with universal jurisdiction if it fails to make progress in accountability and what he referred to as transitional justice. His choice of language targets the previous government under Mahinda Rajapaksa, not the present, strengthens Washington's allies within the present regime, and advances Washington's project to gain international legitimacy for its unilateral intervention in the internal affairs of states. The attacks, I'm referring to the recent anti-Muslim attacks, also help advance Feltman's agenda, which is inseparable from the agenda of Washington. Feltman is a neoconservative hawk who has been involved in fomenting violence and the breakup of sovereign states into ethnic enclaves. Within the UN, he is responsible for a team working on constitutional arrangements promoting federalism as a response to ethnic minority grievances. Describing the anti-Muslim clashes as a conflict between Buddhists and Muslims, or between Sinhalese and Muslims, and this is where also the media has to be very careful, only serves such an agenda, dividing people on ethnic religious lines, fomenting conflict between them, keeping them permanently divided and therefore weak, ultimately permits the partition of their country and the imposition of the infamous Kosovo model that we all know of by now. Now, I would like to conclude with my conclusion is that the anti-Muslim attacks serve only Washington's agenda, and perhaps it's some of its other allies, because I believe also that the story is not just one-sided. They are fomenting, as we know, elsewhere in other parts of the world. They support extreme groups on the two sides, on both sides. So I would imagine that some of the American allies are also fomenting extremism on the side of the Muslims, or side of as they did with the Tamils, with the LTT separatists, but not all Tamils. Again, I would like to underline, but certain elements. And so my conclusion is that the anti-Muslim attacks serve only Washington's agenda. Propping up its allies, now I'm referring to the present situation, propping up its allies in a tottering Yahapalana government, silencing the opposition within and outside government, dividing the people, shifting their attention away from the real issues, and advancing Washington's project of turning Sri Lanka into a vassal state that can be utilized in its strategy of containing and rolling back China. The anti-Muslim attacks are not in the interests of the people. That is why I would like to conclude by reiterating my appeal to the Sri Lankan people not to be swayed by the events imposed upon them from the outside, but to keep their focus and pursue the issues that concern them directly, the real issues, the issues that affect their daily lives, their working and living conditions, the issues that determine their vote and political choice at the recent local government elections. Thank you.